All right, everyone, welcome to DAO Talk. Today, we're going to be talking with Patrick McCorry. He's a researcher at the Arbitrum Foundation, and we're going to dive into everything Arbitrum Foundation, its mission, its role, how it interfaces with the DAO. We're going to talk about the Arbitrum DAO and why it's so new and exciting. So if you're interested in that, let's jump in and we'll just get started. Patrick, would love to hear from you on your background. So tell us a little bit of the story of how you got into the space and kind of what you're working on now at the Arbitrum Foundation.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, by the way. So I got into the space a long time ago. So I did my PhD in it from 2013 to 2016. And so back then, only Bitcoin really existed. Ethereum was still just an idea. The way I got into it was thanks to my advisor, my PhD advisor, Fong Hao. So I was an undergrad. I was in a cryptography module. Cryptography was really hard. And so I wanted to do a PhD in cryptography. Naturally, you pick the hardest topic to do a PhD in. So I went to meet Fong and I was like, Fong, is there any cool topics I could do a PhD in around cryptography? And he mentioned this thing called Bitcoin. It's a cryptocurrency being used in the dark web to buy drugs, but it has the word crypto in it. So it must be full of interest in cryptography. So I went back, I went on the website, I read about it, I downloaded the white paper, and I'm like, damn, this is pretty damn cool. It's like, it does have, on hindsight, it only has hash functions and signatures, so it's really boring from cryptography perspective, but just the whole online community was fascinating. So that's why I got started. I joined the IRC channels like Bitcoin Wizards, Bitcoin Dev. I was very proactive there, just trying to learn how all this works and obviously write papers. Then after my PhD, I had a research career until about 2019. I hopped around various universities like UCL, King's College, UIUC. And then I think in 2019, I had this like moment where I thought, well, I'm 27 now in 2019. And I thought, do I really want to be a professor for the next 20 years or do I want to go try something else? So I decided to leave the university, try to do a startup in 2020 bear market. Me and a guy, two people and a dog, basically. But it got acquired anyway by Infura. Then after Infura, I joined the Arbitrum Foundation about a month ago. But historically speaking, a lot of my work and research has been around layer 2 protocols like Bitcoin Lightning Network, Plasma, Rollups. So I've been following Arbitrum since the very beginning, and I was really excited to have the opportunity to join it. And also, I also wanted to see what it would be like to work with a DAO. So I was like, oh, the foundation's probably a great fit for that.
I love it. Sounds like a really amazing background for getting into the space and really understanding the fundamentals from a cryptography perspective. Sounds like you have a really great understanding of both Bitcoin and Ethereum, which is cool. That's something you share in common with Denison, Tally CEO. Like, I feel like there's fewer and fewer people in the space these days who actually like really understand both. I think that's true of like the Arbitrum team, if I remember correctly as well, or I guess the Off-Chain Labs team, like they kind of started in the Bitcoin space. So I feel like it's cool to have that fundamental background.
Well, just for references around that, like Ed Felton and Stephen Goldfeder, they both wrote, contributed towards the Bitcoin book back in 2015, 2016. So they've been just for around as long as I have been, to be honest. And then the first time I met Stephen in real life, I think it was CESC, the Crypto Economics at Berkeley, around 2017. And he told me about this thing he was working on about referee delegation that later became Arbitrum. So yeah, they've been in it for a very long time.
Very cool. And you made the classic exciting choice, possible mistake, we'll find out. Hey, I want to try working with a DAO. Yeah. Many have said this. It's like the roller coaster meme where it's like the family is going up smiling and then there's like a crew of skeletons going like back down the thing on the other side.
That was definitely that was definitely my third day on the job anyway with the AIP one.
Yeah, that was probably fun. You're like, this was a huge mistake.
This is really fun. I don't know. It was really exciting.
Hey, being the main character has its pluses and minuses. Cool. We'll use that as jumping off point actually. So I'd love to hear about your first experiences with the foundation. Maybe we could talk about like where the foundation is, like kind of in the initial setup and mission, and maybe a little bit about where the DAO is too. So kind of like, what the DAO has in place, where it's kind of like getting rolling here in the early days.
Bylaws. what is the foundation ultimately responsible for? There's generally three different criteria. One is, grants and ecosystem growth. Can we support the ecosystem, get partnerships and drive, the Arbitrum network? The second is technical improvements. So one example of that is hiring service providers who can hopefully, do code and contribute towards the Arbitrum network. But it's also to have our own research team. So part of my job at the foundation is to build up a research team who can hopefully, one, maybe we can come up with cool ideas the Arbitrum network could, vote on and adopt, or the DAO could adopt. But two, to make sure that we're well enough informed so that when a new proposal does come up for the DAO, we can provide context and help the DAO with, help provide enough factual information so they can make a good judgment on how to vote for it. So it's not to sway them, but to provide enough information so they can actually do their job. And the third one is education. Can we provide education about the Arbitrum network, about smart contracts, about Ethereum, and really help onboard bystanders who want to join the cryptocurrency space? And that's also part of my role is education, which would be like an online class, workshops, hackathons, etc. Really just trying to bring people in to hopefully, support our network.
That's a really exciting mission. And I think, like, personally, from my perspective as an Arbitrum delegate and user and ecosystem participant, I would say I'm very bullish on the amount of impact that you'll be able to make, with that kind of research and education focus. Just thinking about the DAO as an example, you mentioned this idea of like, hey, if there are proposals that are coming up from the DAO or initiatives the DAO wants to pursue, right? It's like providing additional information, education, research on those initiatives. I think there's the potential for like a really positive dynamic there with the community. From what I've seen in the Arbitrum forums, especially lately, like it's really, really starting to heat up in there. There's sort of like in a good way, right? Like there's a lot of really interesting ideas for what to do to bubble up that are very constructive. But I think crossing the chasm from like, this is something people are excited about in the forum to like, this is a proposal that can go through a social signaling vote and ultimately go on chain on Tally is like, that's kind of where we are today, right? Like there's a few like really interesting ideas that are kind of like in that, like, this seems like it probably can and should happen, like some version of it, but like trying to sort of like the community to refine it, fully flesh it out, right, and get it across the finish line is kind of that next step. So I think, the Arbitrum Foundation being just one player in that ecosystem is really like a smart way to think about it, in my opinion.
Yeah, and just on that, if I can add a comment, I feel like the role of the foundation is to be a steward and a shepherd, and basically like Switzerland in a way. Our job is really to work with the DAO to help the DAO come up with their own proposals that then they, vote on and hopefully upgrade or support the Arbitrum network. So we just see ourselves as stewards. We're trying our best to support people as opposed to encouraging them on what they should be doing.
Yeah, exactly. And I can say, like, as a delegate, potential proposer, all the things, I'm personally like I love the Arbitrum ecosystem to spend a ton of time there. And the DAO, like I definitely have observed y'all playing that role, and I think it's been great, right? Like it's like because it's kind of like the DAO launch is like, right, we have this like fully fledged, like super decentralized thing with all these resources. We have the foundation and we have a discourse, like a forum. Go, right? It was interesting because it took a while for like, there was kind of like I observed like a cold start problem in the discourse in the forum, but now it's very active. Like anyone who's like interested in Arbitrum or DAOs should go look at the Arbitrum DAO forum right now. And I actually think that was very helpful, right? Because I think there's a tendency, from foundations or like other, I guess, like centralized entities within DAO ecosystems to be like, the DAO's live, here's how it works, right? And as soon as you do that, you kind of like kill the possibility for things to like really bubble up. And so because you all didn't take that approach of like, no, this is how the DAO like works, right? I think it's created this like very, very interesting dynamic where people really see opportunity to like do stuff and innovate in the DAO from more of a bottoms up perspective.
Yeah, no, I think so. Yeah, just on that, I think there's two things I want to mention. Is sort of one is, I mean, I've never had a relationship with Off-Chain Labs. I've just joined the foundation. But if you think about it from their perspective, it's pretty crazy that they've taken their entire, startup, effectively, their entire IP, the software, and they give it away to a community. And they didn't just give it away, as you said, they give everything away. And now it's fully up to the DAO to decide how the smart contracts and the overall system is governed. And that's a huge task to ask, anyone to take up. So it's really cool to see DAO members step up for that. I think the second thing I want to mention, and it's really to do with like how to, so as part of my job, I've been trying to work out, why is a DAO useful? Why do we need DAOs? I think that's a really important question to ask when you join an organization that's working with a DAO. So the way I like to think about it is that when you have open source software, you have GitHub, you have the code maintainers, anyone can come along, they can read the code, they can contribute code, and they can also download the code and they could run the code themselves. That's open source software. Now, what's interesting about these blockchain systems is that you have the open source code, but what you also have is a single instance or a single deployment of the code. There's only one Bitcoin, there's only one Ethereum, and in this case, there's only one Arbitrum 1 or Arbitrum Nova. And so once you have this live instance that, at least Arbitrum's case, I think their TVL is like $6 billion right now. You have $6 billion there of a live instance, and you need to work out how do you govern this? How do we go about approving upgrades and who's responsible for doing that? And there's different ways you could do it. One would be a centralized authority, a single signature, they can authorize it. It could be a multi-sig, or it could be a DAO. People who care, if you get the governance token, you're now responsible for ultimately protecting this network and protecting this live instance of the software. And I think a lot of people, once you conceptualize it that way, it makes a lot of sense to have a DAO. And they have a very, very important purpose for protecting the live instance. And so now, it's up to them to do it. And it's a deep dive, at least for them anyway, to start thinking about how to do this.
To your point, like Patrick's not LARPing about not having worked with Off-Chain Labs prior to joining the foundation. I know this to be true because Tally, we worked very deeply with Off-Chain Labs prior to the DAO launch, just helping make sure the DAO worked on Tally, basically, and doing some technical implementation, and working on comms and announcements and such, and like it was interesting, like once the DAO was announced, there's kind of like this new it was like, and here's the foundation, right? So it's been interesting, like building a relationship with you all as like obviously a collaborative but distinct entity to the Off-Chain Labs team. I will say, just on that note, also, like that's like our whole thesis, kind of the last thing you said there about like, if you have this sort of like state, right? There's sort of like a state of a smart contract that holds a bunch of value. Sort of the optimal way to actually manage that is through a DAO, because it allows, it kind of creates a shared incentive with all the ecosystem participants, and also potentially, hopefully, the goal is to achieve credible neutrality, so people feel like they can really do their thing in the ecosystem without being at odds with the incentives of the given centralized party. And like the Off-Chain Labs team felt the same way. Like as soon as I saw their DAO design, I was like, oh my god, someone finally understands us. Like it's very, very interesting. But like we obviously, I'm like completely biased because like Tally's whole roadmap is around this sort of like protocol management via DAOs. But we feel the same way, right? Like this is the Arbitrum DAO is sort of like the biggest experiment ever in this, and we are
it definitely feels like
attention.
It definitely feels like a huge experiment, that's for sure. Maybe one thing I wanted to add there as well is sort of like you were sort of talking about the security of it a little bit. If you look at these like layer 1 networks like Bitcoin and Ethereum, so the security of those networks is basically 99.9999% of the time the software does the job. You have a consensus protocol, you have proof of stake, proof of work. The protocol just works and everyone's protected because of that. But when the system breaks down, and there's been many cases where both Bitcoin and Ethereum have had issues with the software, what you need to rely on is sort of rough consensus and these actors to come along, patch the bug, deploy it and get people to adopt it. And layer 2s like Arbitrum are exactly the same. 99.999% of the time, the Arbitrum network will protect the funds. And 0.0009% of the time, you need some human intervention, either to upgrade the software or to fix bugs. But the difference here compared to layer 1 is that we have explicit governance. There's a security council that everyone's aware of, and we know what they can do. We have the DAO itself. They have the voting proposals, has to go through tally. Arbitrum's one of the only DAOs with on-chain governance where the DAO can authorize a software upgrade and it will upgrade the smart contract suite for Arbitrum. And that's amazing. It's actually really nice to really test, explicit governance and see how well it works compared to rough consensus.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very, you kind of made this point earlier in the conversation, like very bold, that the Off-Chain Labs team was like, no, we're gonna do this, like it's actually gonna be decentralized, right? But I will say too, it's not like sometimes in the space you get teams who are like, it's actually going to be decentralized, and we're gonna just like do that real quick and bounce, right? It's maybe not as thoughtful, right, as you would hope, that like a decentralization process. But one thing that I think is also very, very cool and very, I guess, promising about the Arbitrum DAO is like, even though it is actually really decentralized, there's like this recognition that it's experimental still, the DAO is, and like the roll-up technology, right? And so you have this element of the security council where like it has, it's sort of like a totally separate entity in many ways, but that is managed by the DAO that does have the ability to circumvent governance. But there's sort of this like very clear roadmap to sort of like DAO. Well, the DAO already owns it in terms of the members that are on the council. And then also this roadmap, to potentially, hopefully removing it like eventually, right, when everything is sufficiently hardened. And that's something that I think, on the one hand, you could say like, oh, well, that's not decentralized. There's a 9 out of 12 security council, but I think it's really appropriate for DAOs to like sort of recognize, and this is my opinion, like where they are in their maturation life cycle, and like when are safeguards in play, required to do them, but then to do them in a very transparent way. Because the other implementation you see of that is like the DAO knows that it's too scary to completely 100% decentralize. And then they have sort of like hidden or non-transparent mechanisms by which like individuals or entities can control the chain. And that's we really don't like that design pattern at Tally.
Of course, yeah.
And so we like, that's something that I think is cool too. I'll just throw out, is just like the existence of the security council I think is appropriate, right? But also it's implemented in a completely modular way and it's controlled by the DAO, so everyone can sort of see how it works. And like there's this pathway to sort of like managing it out over time.
Yeah, just to talk about the Security Council. So, as part of the Arbitrum Constitution, there's an election every 6 months to appoint, to re-elect certain members. So, I guess maybe another way to phrase it is that the Security Council, according to the Arbitrum Constitution, it lays out the election process for Security Council members. So that happens every 6 months, and they're in cohorts. So I think it's like the September cohort, and then you have the March cohort. And so by September, we'll be electing hopefully another, 6 Security Council members that may replace the existing 6 Security Council members. So it's really nice about the DAO is that every 6 months they have an opportunity to review who's on the council, and obviously to appoint or vote in new people who they think is fit to do that role. And long term, if they wish, they can make a proposal, an AIP constitutional modification to modify that and remove the Security Council altogether when they see fit that it's ready to do that. And I think that just to jump on your point about transparency, I think it's very important. I think what's cool about DAOs is that they can have this tiered authorization or tiered authority, and they can define the responsibilities of each group, and they can all be explicit and transparent. So there's no secret there's a council. We can also say what are their duties as part of that, as being part of the council as well. It's very important to have all this explicit as possible. You don't want any hidden backdoors, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, it's not like, DAOs or smart contracts provide some sort of like magic decentralization. Like, oh, now there's a smart contract, it's decentralized, right? It's more that they enable this like very clear and like auditable control and sort of the ability to actually enforce that, right, in a decentralized way, which I think is like a very important nuance that a lot of people miss, right? And you see this in the discourse around DAOs, like on Twitter, right? Everyone's like, whoa, DAOs are fake. They're not actually decentralized. They're not actually autonomous. And like, yeah, it's true. There are a lot of people using the term DAO where they're just like, oh, we have a smart contract thing and a token. It's a DAO, right? And it's like, actually, no, you sort of like, you sort of like know that the tools exist and didn't actually like fully avail yourself of the opportunities, to control them. So anyway, yeah,
I mean, I can make one point on that if you want around decentralization. So normally when I teach classes, one of my favorite questions they ask is, when you hear the word decentralization, what do you think? What does it make you? What does it spark in you? Maybe I could ask you right now. When you hear the word decentralization, what does that mean to you? What does it mean to be decentralized from your perspective?
Yeah, I would say like a decentralization is like an environment where anyone through their own merit can sort of like participate fully, right? Like they can the environment makes it possible for truly like anyone to understand the system and then fully participate sort of on the same basis as any other.
Okay, that's awesome, man. So basically anyone can contribute and it's based on merit. It's based on the type of quality of work that you do and not necessarily about your identity and who you are. You could be an anon with a badger avatar and you'll still be equally respected as someone with an identity. Yeah, so I think for DAOs actually that's very applicable and very useful. But I think but decentralization is like a spectrum as well. And the way I like to think about it is sort of one is sort of like operators of the system. You want to maximize the number of participants who can actually participate in the process. That's sort of to your point. Can we make a DAO where anyone can participate and be valued equally as anyone else based on their merit? The second one's more about verifiability. How many people out there can actually check that the system's running correctly and that it is safe, it's secure, and of course, check, run the protocol transcript themselves and say, yes, I'm confident this was done right. And so in the case of a DAO, that's really the governance votes. Can anyone count the tally? Can anyone check the tally and see that all the votes were done correctly? And obviously the upgrade process was done correctly as well. Then the third one's affordability. And maybe this gets to your delegation week as well. It should be affordable for people to participate as well. If I'm a token holder and I want to delegate my coins to a delegate, it should be affordable for me to do that as well, because otherwise I lose my voice. And so as part of delegation week, it's important that I now have a free opportunity to delegate my coins and I can participate because it's being sponsored by someone else. So yeah, I think that's sort of like, and there's a whole spectrum around that. And then there's also the culture. You want to make sure you foster this environment such that anyone can come up and participate. And I think that's fostering something like Ethereum's done really well. And we have to sort of try to work out how we can do it as well.
Absolutely. Arbitrum is such a great venue or opportunity to explore that kind of accessibility, affordability angle in DAOs. Like I guess this is an opportunity for me to plug Gasless Delegation. Tally has partnered with a few DAOs where the DAO will sponsor transactions and then Tally will relay them on behalf of the user so they don't have to pay gas for delegation. And like, on Arbitrum, Arbitrum is doing this and it's great and it's saving, a material amount of money, especially in the aggregate, right, for all the users. But like for some of these mainnet DAOs, like right now, if you are trying to like change your delegation in Uniswap or ENS or Hops, $15, $20, maybe more. It's like that's expensive. That's brutal. Like it's like the amount of privilege you have to be like, yes, it's economically rational for me to spend like $20 delegating my tokens is sort of like really high. And so I think that's like a fantastic point. And one maybe as another side note, like we're really excited to see some of this early traction in the Arbitrum ecosystem, right, on DAOs. I think Arbitrum, the protocol and the DAO is setting an example for other protocols to be like, oh, I can do this out, but I can do it on Arbitrum where it's affordable to participate. I can really bring my community in. So I think there's a whole thread there just around what you mentioned, like a sort of accessibility and affordability of decentralization.
Yeah, and actually, just on that point as well, about participation, as we're all aware, AIP1 was rejected overwhelmingly by the DAO, and part of the rejection was that when the foundation was set up, ideally we would get our budget from the DAO, and the DAO would approve our budget. And of course, the DAO looked at the proposal and said, no, the proposal's too long, too complicated, not transparent enough, and just rejected us outright. That was my third day on the job, and that sort of all started to explode. And that's a great starting point. It's like, wow, the DAO actually has real authority and it can reject this. And then as the foundation members, we had to, we had 3 documents. One was to say, these are the facts. This is what's happened. This was necessary to set up the DAO, or the foundation as well, to set everything up. The second was AIP 1.1 about our budget. Thanks to the DAO, we now have it's a vesting contract that will be continuous over 4 years. And it also promises, our transparency reports, etc. None of that, I guess, would have been done without the DAO forcing us to do it initially. It was a great way to start it. I mean, obviously we were going to be transparent, but it's explicit now in the proposal. We have to do this, which is awesome. Then the second was obviously AIP 1.2 was more about, we've had to set up the constitution, we've had to set up the framework. Does anyone have any feedback on how this could be changed before it actually gets finalized? And there were some minor comments around that, but it wasn't, it wasn't the most active part, I guess. Obviously, the budget was the most active part. But just to highlight, the DAO kickstarted in a great way to really show that they have authority, their opinion matters, and people should get involved because you can actually have a voice and impact how these systems are run. And it's a great way to start a DAO anyway. I thought it was great.
Heck yeah. I love it. I love the openness to feedback and it's, man, I gotta transition to our closing question soon because I feel like I could go on all day with you, and I know you're busy. But I'm like having to stop myself, right? But if you look at the history of a lot of the most successful protocols, right, like in Ethereum or Bitcoin, there are these moments of crisis that happen where it forces the community to be like, who are we really? And what is acceptable? And sort of you come out the other end with this very clear understanding of the remaining participants of what they're sort of here for, right? And so I think, I'm not trying to compare AIP1 to the DAO fork or something in Ethereum. It's probably not quite that big, but it's just interesting, right? As the way to set the tone for the DAO. Everyone was like, okay, this is what we think about this going forward.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to call it a black swan event, but events out of the ordinary set the tone and values for the entire community. That's Bitcoin block size wars in terms of how they want to progress scalability, the DAO, code is law, etc. Yeah, it's always these moments that really are really defining. Well,
let's use this as an opportunity when there's not another tangent that I'm excited about going off down to transition to our closing question. So the first one is a 2-parter. It's what's your favorite part of working in the space, DAOs, crypto, Arbitrum, whatever, and what's your least favorite part or something you think that we need to work on as a community?
So my favorite part is, I'm historically an academic. I did my PhD in this area. I think it's the intellectual, I don't want to say curiosity, the intellectual depth that's always been persistent over the past 10 years. It started off in Bitcoin in 2013 on the Bitcoin Wizards channel. Then what I realized there was that Bitcoin has 2 communities. One is gold, one is about technology. Ethereum picked up the technology community, and that's where a lot of the intellectual, struggle is, or fight. I don't know how you want to describe that. And then I joined Ethereum, and I sort of just really enjoyed the challenge of trying to understand how all of this works and this rapid progression. There's so many talented people in this space who are just, and a lot of them are anon as well. I don't know who they are. They're like frog avatars or my ladies. And but yeah, it's just there's so much intellectual depth there that as an academic I've never ever been bored of the area. If anything, I can't keep up anymore. The worst part, I guess this sounds really dumb. I think the worst part is sort of going to an Ethereum conference, then there's a nightclub and the music's too loud and I can't talk to anyone. I'm a bit of an old man, and I like to go to events where I can chat to people about stuff. So that's probably the worst part for me. not even the scams. I mean, obviously the scams are bad, but as a
Yeah.
personal experience, it's the nightclubs.
Crypto culture is so interesting, man. Like I'm newer to the space than you are, maybe a couple years, now. And I was going to Ethereum Denver this year, and I was trying to explain to my family who's in town and friends. I was like, okay, it's like, how do I explain what this conference is? It's like, 3 years ago, it was just a complete like degenerate, lovingly like experience, right? It's like all these hardcore like anarcho punks, like crypto people, degens, regens, people who just complete nomads, right? Like just hackers, right? And now there's sort of like this suit culture also. So like you're walking around Ethereum Denver and like there's like some like investment banker and then there's like someone with their shirt off with like a unicorn painted on them and like a tail and like it's like there's this part of me that's like I want to keep like the edge, but I'm like, what if we just like canceled the raves though? Because I feel exactly the same way as you. Like, can we just like talk now?
Anyway. You might get canceled for saying that.
Yeah, I know, right? Don't tell it like any of the Ave people I said this.
Yeah, maybe it's a bit like Austin in a way. Austin was full of hippies and cowboys, and they still live together in peace.
Yeah, exactly. Ethereum's for everyone, right? All right, and the last question is, what is your favorite place in the world and why?
My favorite place, so I think one place that a special place in my heart is Barbados. Anyone who's in the research community will laugh because they know that already. And there's two. I think the main reason is that there's my favorite conference is called Financial Cryptography. It's an old cypherpunk conference that started in 1997 around the crypto wars, like the old crypto wars about encryption. And now it's been, I don't want to say hijacked, but it's very much cryptocurrency focused now. And back in 2015, I think it was 2016, I got to meet a bunch of researchers that I'm huge fanboys of. And we got drunk on a pirate ship having rum punch. It was great. And since Barbados always had this good vibe with me. So even during COVID, I went there for 3 months just to get away from COVID and just swim every day, write articles, papers, and just really enjoy the sun. So yeah, I really like Barbados. And they have lots of roosters, and the roosters are really peaceful. Wild roosters everywhere.
That's amazing. Barbados. So like asking this question every time is really bad for me because I'm a traveler and I'm like, okay, well now I have to go there now.
Yeah, well, what's your favorite place then?
Oh man, I've never had it turned around on me live. Let's see. So I'll go with, so I live in Salt Lake City, Utah, and there's a few hours south in southern Utah, there's this geological area called the Colorado Plateau. And that's where all of the famous national parks, like in America, like Arches National Park and Canyonlands and Zion, with the big like towering sandstone walls are. But there's also like huge swaths of it that just like no one goes to. It's like, one of the most remote places in the Americas. And there's all these like crazy canyons. It's like a lot wetter than you would expect because in general, the environment's very dry, but all the water collects in these canyons. And so you can go in the canyons and there's like wildlife in there. It's pretty wild. So anyway, I'll go with the Colorado Plateau.
That's really cool. I'll check it out then. I think Denver's in Colorado, isn't it? So it makes it
yeah. Denver is also, you basically have to go. So if you go to Salt Lake, you have to go like 3 or 4 hours south. If you go to Denver, you have to go like 4 hours west.
Okay, road trip then. Road trip.
Yeah, exactly. It's hard to get to. It's like, very remote, but very cool. Cool. Well, Patrick, thank you so much for making the time for coming on DAO Talk. And we'll be following the Arbitrum DAO closely going forward.